Rockport, Massachusetts is a small town on the North Shore. With 17 miles of rocky shoreline, for over 200 years, granite was quarried and ships carried it around the country. Then, in 1861, a big change came to the town, and this one came by land: the railroad. Railroad service began running to Rockport, while tourism and light industry began to develop. But how did it get here?
In 1847, the Eastern Railroad reached Gloucester, and it ended in Gloucester. The town of Rockport, seeing the advantage for both industry and the tourist business, wanted the railroad here. The Eastern Railroad refused to build it, so the town of Rockport, at a town meeting, voted the money to build a railroad. The town of Rockport built the railroad from Rockport to Gloucester. They never bought any trains or equipment, but it took from 1847 to 1861 before Rockport had a railroad.
That was former MBTA engineer and Rockport resident Alan McMillan. Having worked for the railroad for 40 years, Mr. McMillan knows every single tie and spike that holds the MBTA system together. Now, Alan, let's imagine the year is 1900. What would we see?
You would see this crane. I don't think they built the new engine house yet. The original engine house sat down in that area of the parking lot, and the turntable was where those two cars were over there. There would have been a covered station here too, and lots of freight cars. The other side of that former station platform roof, there were multiple tracks over there. There were trains stored there, and there were freight cars on both sides. So this was a very busy place with lots of activity going on, all kinds of industry around here. There were multiple companies here that received their freight by rail. Lots of passenger service, especially in the summer, because this was a huge destination for tourists in the summer, going back to the late 19th century.
Fascinating, Alan. Now, are there any interesting stories you'd like to tell about this station?
The original turntable that was over in there in 1905, two drunk guys, they hijacked a steam locomotive right here. Two guys got on, of course there wasn't full steam, they ran the steam locomotive up the hill over there. That's a 1% grade for a 1 mile, going up to the top of the hill to Piggery Crossing. The engine ran out of steam because it didn't have a full fire in it. So they abandoned ship and decided to walk to Rockport while the engine rolled back down the hill. The track was not lined at the turntable onto the turntable, it was sideways, so the engine went down in the pit. 1905, it was written up in the local papers here. In 1927, a train coming into Rockport, the engineer and the fireman get into an argument in the cab. Remember, it's uphill going to Boston, it's downhill coming from Boston. The switch, instead of being lined into the station, which was actually a good thing, it was lined into one of those tracks on the other side of what is that old station platform over there. The train, fortunately, instead of going across the street itself with a locomotive, it hit a string of cars and shoved the cars across the street, demolished a Model T, but it didn't hurt anybody. No one was injured, but the engineer lost his job.
Alan, I must ask, are there any long-standing relics still remaining at this station worth pointing out?
This crane was installed here by the B&M in 1938 to unload freight cars. Down there you can see the old freight house, which still exists. There used to be multiple farms here in Rockport. All the animal feed to feed the cows, the horses, came by train to the freight house. And there was an automobile dealership downtown Rockport in Dock Square. New automobiles came by train to Rockport. 5 automobiles to a boxcar on 2 levels, 1 at each end and then a rack above them with 1, 2, 3 more. They were unloaded there, and there used to be a very wide ramp, wide enough to drive a car down, on the far end of the freight house, and that ramp was how they got the automobiles out of the boxcar and drove them downtown to the dealership.
Let's look at the station right now. Clearly, lots of changes have occurred here since its building in 1847. Could you point some of those out?
No, it's just before World War I. They moved, this whole area got changed around a bit. A new engine house was built just behind that building. They built a new roundhouse with, I think, had 5 stalls in it, and they did not have a turntable. There was a turntable down here in the beginning, what they call an Armstrong turntable, a wooden turntable that the crew had to push around. When they built the new engine house up there, they built a loop track to turn trains around. And that loop track still exists. You can walk around it today.
That's at the loop.
That's where Loop Pond gets its name.
All right.
Of course, back when railroads began, everything was steam powered.
Interesting. So, I heard that Rockport Station almost got sold once. Is that true?
In 1972, secretly, without the town knowing, the B&M was going to sell this property and do away with the service. It was a really tough time in the railroad industry. People don't realize half of this station parking lot is owned by the town of Rockport. It never was owned by the railroad.
Finally, could you tell me about how the station masters here controlled the train movements?
This was a very busy place, especially in the summer, and trains used both tracks. Wow. And by the way, Rockport Station, which existed up into the 1960s, mid-1960s, you'll see pictures of railroad stations. There's 2 arms that could be down like this or out like this, or one down, one up. Those tell a train approaching the station that the station has written train orders for the train. Rockport Station, there was only 1 arm on that order board. Every other station in the land, there were 2 arms. If they were like this, that meant train orders for trains in both directions. Say there were no train orders for a train coming this way, that arm would be down. But if there was a train order for a train going that way, this arm on the signal, that would mean that there was a train order for the train going that way. Rockport only had 1 arm, and that's because the track ended right at the station. There couldn't be a train going that way any further than the bumping post. But going into Boston, there would be, and the engineer could see if that arm was up, he couldn't leave without a train order.
There clearly is so much history behind Rockport Station, and we're not even finished with uncovering it all. I hope you all learned an assortment of new things from this video, and if you enjoyed it, keep an eye out for episode 2, covering the fascinating reason why railroad freight service vanished from Cape Ann.